I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. This week, an exploration I've been wanting to do for a long time. To call for grassroots organizing is like calling for honesty. Pervasive and immemorial. But what does it really mean? Indeed, where are the grassroots? I talked to two young community organizers, Tino Fragale, who founded a group called Everyday Canvassing, which knocks on doors of thousands of homes, mainly in the less wealthy parts of Montgomery County, and Anika Manzoor, who took an existing operation organizing young people in high schools called Youth Activism Project and expanded it to 300 students in high schools across the country.
How much you got my heart racing. I haven't felt this in a long time. Do you know how much you got my head spinning?
If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. It is my hope that this podcast will help those who feel left out reconnect in our local communities.
I had figured you out. You find a way to come.
Music for this episode comes from Sic Em Buster, a Washington area rock metal band. We use their song I've Got Athlete's Foot and I'm Wearing Your Socks. Chris Burkhaw on vocals, Joseph Nguyen, and Anshu Bhatia on the guitars.
Leave me here hanging off a cliff. I'm just so tired of trying to make sense of everything that you say and do.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. In the news this week, the District of Columbia Public Schools. Public anger builds as DCPS refuses to offer a virtual option for students this fall. Families who are unwilling to send their students back to in-person schools are apoplectic. The conditions inside of schools is iffy at best. Parents have been speaking angrily at public forums, including the DC Council and the State Board of Education. Nationwide, the number of children testing positive and being hospitalized has surged in the last few weeks. Children still account for a lower percentage of hospitalizations than other age groups, but scientists have been cautioning about long-haul effects, and it is hard to argue statistics with parents focused on the welfare of their own children. Meanwhile, Children's Hospital in D.C. has been reporting long waits and significant increases in hospitalizations. While DCPS officials are claiming appropriate social distancing and protocols, teachers and parents from across the system are not happy with the situation. Many families who chose to keep their kids home without unenrolling them are fearful that they may now be contacted by truancy prevention. DCPS is apparently intervening with families informally. In MCPS news, student math and literacy took a hit during the pandemic. As expected, low-income and minority students saw the biggest drops. What should be done? Historically, MCPS has had difficulty targeting resources and learning to students from low-income and minority families, leading to what has been called the achievement and the opportunity gaps. The new test scores may add greater urgency to the need for improvements in student learning in MCPS, but the reality that achievement and opportunity gaps in the school system have been growing for at least 2 decades argues for bold new measures. Bethesda Beat reported interim superintendent Monifa McKnight as saying this: "This is really going to require being intentional and direct to know each learner, to know what their learning needs are, and address them. That has to happen in every classroom with every child in this system. That's what we owe them." Okay, but haven't we known this for 2 decades? The real question is why it hasn't happened yet. And what new steps, new meaning different from the past, will MCPS take? That is unclear. I also have a somewhat different view on the meaning of lower test scores. First, they are test scores and very limited measures of student ability. Math and literacy may have taken a hit, but student ability to navigate Zoom and the digital world is surely up. Also not measured by test scores, baking, gardening, painting, music, and other creative skills, especially for students whose homes enable these activities. But more broadly, it is also interesting to note that the lockdown of schools in spring 2020 was followed by a proliferation of Me Too, Survivor at, and Black at Instagram accounts from MCPS students, alumni, and even some teachers. And the posts on those accounts could only be described as a collective wail of despair. These posts continued well into fall 2020, but began to taper off in spring 2021 once schools reopened. Did the fact of students being released from their school schedules lead them to look inside and engage in self-examination of hurt? The consequences of a pandemic have to be negative, no matter how we look at it. Over 600,000 Americans and millions around the world are dead. Individually, we could have done little about it. Our governments, our public health systems, our education systems failed. Not entirely, but sufficiently for us to reconsider how we organize ourselves as a society. What we have within our power, however, is to make the best of a really bad situation. And in that, I think our children may have gained in life skills even while losing in math and literacy. And being in a constant state of loss is not mentally and socially healthy either. It seems that after months and sometimes years of waiting on news, several real estate projects in Montgomery County are moving forward. The County Planning Board approved a $3 billion project covering 280 acres near White Oak, called Viva White Oak. There has to be a hidden profession somewhere that comes up with these real estate project names. Anyway, Viva White Oak is going to put up 7 million square feet of commercial space and 5,000 residential units. But don't expect all of them to be built immediately. This is a 10-year plan. Meanwhile, in the Twin Brook section of Rockville, long a very distant cousin to the West End power elite, Twin Brook Quarters broke ground. The Twin Brook revitalization is the next big redevelopment on Rockville Pike, and the cause for much excitement. Cumulatively, it seems that Montgomery County real estate projects are moving forward, even if slowly. A little news item from faraway Harris County, Texas. But it will hit home, I promise. Dr. Hassan Gokal was fired from his job at Harris County Public Health Department after he distributed 10 doses of COVID-19 vaccine left in an already open vial rather than letting them go waste. This was in February of 2021. He was charged with theft, but a grand jury declined to charge him. The issue here is that those 10 doses he distributed were mostly to people with Indian and Pakistani-sounding names, including his wife. Dr. Gokal is an immigrant and is now suing the county, Harris County in Texas, for discrimination and seeking damages. But what is interesting to me is this. So the good doctor had 10 extra doses on his hands. Should he have put them in the trash can? Harris County Public Health Department seems to think so. But that would be stupid, especially at a time when vaccines were not as readily available as they are now. So even if he did call 10 friends and family to give them the vaccine, would that be so wrong? Indeed, who else could he have called under those time constraints? Was there a wait list he could have accessed? And would random people have responded to his call and promptly arrived at his door for the shot? No. Under the conditions, these vaccines could only have been distributed within Dr. Gokhal's own personal network to people that knew and trusted him. This is an abject lesson in network effects in public affairs. And yes, we all want to serve the population at large, but we all, and by that I mean we all, are constrained in our actions and options by our own networks. There is some real ethnic politics for you. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Tino Fragale, founder of Everyday Canvassing. Tino Fragale, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. I feel welcomed.
You founded an organization called Everyday Canvassing. What is Everyday Canvassing about?
Everyday Canvassing is about door-to-door outreach. We connect people with services with the activist movements local to Montgomery County, and build relationships with people in community on a consistent basis.
Tell me where you started.
I was actually doing professional campaign work in college over the summer in Prince George's County on a campaign running a delegate for senator on the state level. We lost. She was great. Wish she would have won. In the process, I learned that I really like some things about campaigns and I really dislike some things. And keep in mind that I had already done issue-based organizing throughout college. So this was not my first rodeo with organizing, but it was my first political campaign to be paid to do work. And in that campaign, I learned that I loved how the delegate at the time, Delegate Angela Angel, Prince George's County, D25, had incorporated services within the distribution efforts in literature, in door knocking, and had extra follow-up opportunities to connect with educators in the local school system to have these town halls. So it was a little bit more than just, I want your vote. And I love that. What I disliked is that I felt a lot of pressure, and it wasn't actually from the campaign. And it's just like maybe my first experience. It's hard to say where it came from. Maybe just general democratic political infrastructure. I felt like I had a time limit, that I had to get door to door, that my purpose wasn't there to build relationships, but it was to get the vote. And that was really what we wanted to know. Is this person a yes or no? Are they a lean support, a strong support, a not support, a strongly opposed, and that each interaction was more about that vote. Are you voting for us? Yes or no? Than it was about getting good information, learning about the real problems that folks have in community, connecting them with all the resources a delegate has at their disposal when they do casework throughout their 4 years as a delegate or before in their nonprofit or their private lives. And so I wanted to incorporate that, but beyond just the campaign. And I wanted to enjoy the conversations and get value from them as I felt personally getting value when I would have long ones. I also felt like I was being pulled from those long conversations. I felt then a couple of things. One, that of course, volunteers find it hard to canvass. It's not very fun. And then two, that we could get a lot more value even during a political campaign for office in our campaigns and our door knocking, because we invest and intuitively understand how good it is at building relationships, but then we don't value it and build it out as a campaign, as like a campaign arm to build those relationships necessarily. We don't have strong follow-up often. We don't collect good notes. We don't front load the services and make it easy for volunteers to share those services with people at the door. And so we have less meaningful interactions because they're more about the vote than they are building the relationships. So with the relationships, one thing you build is accountability to people who you wouldn't be accountable otherwise. If you just go and ask everybody for their vote, I get the count, it's important, but you probably won't be the Sunil who came in office, or you'll be a very different person. Of course, it's natural, you change. But I think if you don't build relationships with those strangers then and become close with them, you're not going to have the accountability when you're in office of those strangers that you met on the campaign trail. You're going to have the accountability of very few people who are kind of a revolving door, not necessarily in local politics, that not all of them are paid, but the council members will see very familiar faces over and over again advocating for the same things, rather than the diversity as Montgomery County that is sharing their perspectives on whether that's policing, infrastructure, community spaces, public safety, what else? Housing.
How do you organize? How do you get people? How do you identify where you want to go and canvass?
I identify places with our team by apartments. Usually, those are usually our favorite ways to knock. We've knocked suburbs plenty in the past, but we prefer apartments. And we could also knock rural areas. I think that's like in the future or long term.
Okay, but what apartment? I mean, it's not just apartment generically, right? What are the metrics you're using to identify where you're knocking?
It's not so complex at the moment. It really is off of a lot of intuition at the beginning, and personal knowledge, people that we know there. And then when we knock, we learn that they're like, oh, we've never seen anybody before. We've never talked with anybody about this stuff before. Oh, I'm a part of this church that like has been connecting me with things, or I'm a part of this mosque that's been connecting me with local services and civic groups. And so that's like how we figure things out over time. Like we've knocked all of those White Oak, Stewart Lane, Lockwood Corridor apartments, right? So like we now have a very good understanding of what is and what wasn't happening there. Same with the Briggs Cheney Fairland area. We've knocked every single complex in that area as well.
Okay, so total, how many doors have you knocked, and in how many years?
I'm going to start with months because that's where we have the best data. We've knocked about 8,250 doors in a month. In White Oak, we knocked, I'm not certain like I said, it's about 3,000 earlier, more or less, but we've knocked all of those apartments twice over as well. And we knocked those in the year prior.
So you started in 2019. Is that when you started?
2019, May of 2019.
Okay. And you would say that you've knocked like 20,000 doors since then, 50,000 doors?
20,000 is probably about right. But like if we have the chance to scale, we can knock easily. We can knock between like about 4,000 a week. We had a short-term contract with the planning department to do their knocking for the master plan. This is the first time they ever engaged in outreach. Bold, exciting move on their part. And we knocked 48,250 doors in 10 days.
Let's talk about volunteers and how you recruit. That's one of the biggest challenges, by the way, that any civic engagement campaign faces. So what is your recruitment strategy? Where do you find people? How do you keep them connected?
Luckily, I grew up here. I went to Blair. And I went to Silver Spring International Middle School before that. And I went to Forest Knolls Elementary School before that. They're all pretty proximal to each other. And then I went to University of Maryland. So I've always stayed on University Boulevard,
Yep.
Besides SSI. But besides Silver Spring International Middle School, I grew up with the people that I volunteer with. Originally, right? Like that cast, the original cast started from people that I knew lived in Montgomery County, and went to University of Maryland College Park with, and I always commuted too. So I never left the nest. Or I, went to Blair High School with, and starting from, 6 people in a board of 4 people, it was easy enough, right? Because our goal was consistency in relationship building and not in number of conversations. So as long as we had one other person or 2 other people at a time, we could be out there and knock 100 doors in 4 hours or 3 hours. And over time that built, right? It rolls up because people are like, once in a while, somebody's like, yeah, I want to do this too. Like nothing in my area for me to get involved. I want to get in civic. I want to get involved in local stuff. And so we've built up volunteer networks through the actual volunteering, and it's slow. Like that's one of the things, like, you're like, yeah, it's hard. It's actually like, there are a lot of people that come to you who want to volunteer, right? It's, do you have the sustainability to often add them in? Because like in your campaign, for example, it was short, right? Like we had to run fast. And it's really hard to bring a new volunteer in while you're running so fast.
Right.
And it's also going to end, right? It's going to end suddenly.
Correct.
Where everyday canvassing has been going for 2 years in the same camp, like just bringing people to knock doors. And it's easy because we have a really plug and play model, right? Like you can come to the door with us, we'll train you on the spot, and then an hour later you'll feel comfortable knocking yourselves with a new volunteer. And we always go in pairs. We try to make it fun. We feed people, we have picnics. We do everything to make sure that the volunteer experience is as good as the experience for the people we talk to at the door, at least the ones who want to talk with us.
This is very interesting, something you said here, that you recruited from your network going back to middle school. Does it necessarily need somebody with these kind of deep roots in a community to be able to do what you're doing? Take somebody whose door you're knocking.
Sure.
Right? Can that person do it?
It would take an unfortunate amount of grit. If you started with 0 friends, let's say you don't have a spouse, a partner, children, you are just there, you just moved in, and you moved from Florida. I would say that it'd take a lot of grit because you'd have to knock solo for a while, maybe a couple days before you find somebody who's willing to go out with you. And I don't mean a couple days like 8 hours. Like you probably have to knock 2 days for like 3 to 4 hours, and you'd find maybe somebody who's interested. Particularly if you're knocking your local community, right? So we had one of our employees in this last cycle of work with the planning department. Her name was Abby. Abby lives on the Castle Boulevard strip of Briggs Cheney Road, and it is one of the densest places for walk-up apartment housing in Montgomery County. And she lived in the middle of it. She did walking and knocking for that whole 10 days. By the end of it, she knew so many people, right? And she was like, she started with 0 really local networks. She just knew her neighbor who would come out, and she'd be like, oh, I'm doing this thing, you should get these services, call our number. But besides that, by the end of it, she was like, I'm the mayor of Briggs Cheney.
All right, let me ask the same question for a different demographic. So I've talked to my son, who is a high schooler right now, and he says that, in order for a student, right, a middle school or high school student to become sort of politically and civically involved, you really have to start in 6th grade or even earlier. So he feels like, that as a, sophomore or junior, it's too late for him to develop the networks to be able to, become involved. So so we were talking about the SMOB, for example, and he said only those people that decide to become SMOB in 6th grade become SMOBs, because by the time you get to high school, it's just too late to develop a network. What do you say to that?
You should come canvas with us. It depends on the network you want to develop. And it's tough because you're somewhat a product of your environment, right? Like, and if you are in high school, you might want to develop a network of high schoolers, or to some extent, largely of high schoolers. And at Everyday Canvassing, you will not develop a network of only high schoolers, right? You will have high schoolers involved in the process, and you will also have 65-year-olds and 80 and 42-year-olds. And so you could develop a network that's political, but it won't necessarily be in high school. And I haven't figured that out, right? Like I'm trying to crack that code with Young People for Progress on the other hand, but Everyday Canvassing is just take all, come all. We're going to be knocking doors.
One of the things that I'm most excited when I talk to you about is that it seems like you're always developing a playbook.
What do you mean a playbook?
Like how to organize playbook.
Our goals are different, right? Like in a lot of ways, like again, like speaking of political campaigns, right? Like I don't think a lot of them would jive the methodology. There are some that do. Shout out to Brandy Brooks. But there are some that don't. And that, it's like really against a lot of the stuff that you're used to hearing in the political space. Like you're spending a lot of time building up a relationship with these people, that you don't know yet. And like some people are really about it, but then on the other hand, like you're spending a lot of time investing in this one person who you like know is like going to vote for you now for all the work that you did for them, probably, right? But you don't know what else you might get out of that relationship, but you're just investing because you believe investing in people, and you hope that some return will come out of that.
Why do you want to knock all Montgomery County doors? What purpose does it serve?
Sure. So we want to knock all Montgomery County doors because I think then over time we have a set of relationships across all of Montgomery County that we can, one, know what's happening in those areas, and get a good pulse of like issues as they bubble up, right? Like housing in Gaithersburg versus White Oak versus Freaks Cheney, and downtown Silver Spring and Rockville look very different sometimes. Sometimes they look very similar. And in that way, we can bring people together from those areas or share information from those people with their consent, of course, with activist orgs who want that information, who want to know, like, how do we organize around this? Where is our strategy? How do we build the groundwork? Where are the people and who are they that want to connect and do this work of, like, for example, housing for all, or rent control, or just better maintenance, whatever it is, right? Like, just hypothetical some ideas. Who are they? Where are they? What is the strategy? What do they care about? What are their issues, so that we can organize with them? And that is something that, like, if we know, where people are across the county and what issues they have, and we have those one-on-one interactions, we have a trust-based relationship already. We can connect activists all over the county to activist organizations doing work that want to connect with them, but don't have the regular outreach to do so. The way I see, and the way we see everyday canvassing, is as a vehicle for other organizations to connect with people's interests that we organically have through open-ended conversation at the door, because they're doing the meta-analysis, right? Like Coalition for Smart Growth, Renters Alliance, CASA, they're doing meta-analysis, but they're not doing outreach like we are necessarily to new places regularly, right? And that's what we need to build power for those organizations who have the meta-analysis. At least that's my meta-analysis of civic engagement.
Okay.
So the one thing I have a meta-analysis on is to build power for those and build base for those organizations, because so many people have that organic interest, particularly in housing, right? When we talk at the door, they're like, oh, you know what? The rent is too damn high and I have rodents. How long have you had rodents? 5 months since I moved in. How many times have you complained? 3 times. They don't answer. Like, that's so regular. And there are so many people, like, we want to connect with those organizations because they have a meta-analysis, and it is important. We just, like, that is where our most recent evolution is, that we have to take people to those orgs to build their power and their base, as well as work on the representative side to make representatives better at what they do.
But if you're working for other organizations, to what extent does the mission of those organizations come to dominate the mission of everyday canvassing?
That's a good question. So from an awesome mentor figure, Brandy Brooks, and Michelle Whitaker, who was the campaign manager for Brandy's campaign. On a personal level, we were talking about this, and she shared with me that, like, it's really about having those concrete boundaries beforehand, because there are always going to be conflicts of interest that come up in the work, particularly if you take contracts. If you're a consultant, that happens too. If you have, like, a moral focus as a person, and you're considering a contract with X and Y company, you have to think, where are my boundaries beforehand? Because when it hits you that you could get money for this, you might slip, like, you might be making your boundaries on the fly, and you have different considerations. So at everyday canvassing, we want a few things when we come to the table. One is we want to be able to have open-ended conversations. We don't want to be restricted to, like, a 10-question survey of specific things. Like, it's not a good volunteer experience. We don't see it as a good experience for the people that we're talking to on the other end as much. Like, if we have those open-ended conversations, we can build relationships there, and we can find other uses for the conversations we have outside of just the information itself. So that's one of our ground rules. there are other ground rules, but I would say that's one of the most important, right? That like we are having open-ended conversations. We are starting with open-ended questions. And that helps us decide what we do take and what we don't.
I assume you're hopeful about the future.
I'm hopeful about everyday canvassing. I mean, I think that like in many ways, this contract with the planning department was probably not the first step I expected, right? Like I definitely didn't. I never thought we would, somebody would want our information services, like just like knocking door to door and sharing information that we learn to build the master plan. Like really, like that is the dream in some ways, right? Like they're not representatives, but they do create the recommendations for how Briggs Cheney develops, you know, like they develop the plan very specifically for a little area, you know, and to have them come out knocking with us to get the data like from renters, you know, like check out all the other plans. I bet you renters are very not well represented in their sample, you know, like to go that far and to have 600 and some renter voices in their data to like build this master plan off of initially, right? This is the beginning of it too. And they have phone numbers to follow up on. You know, that's like an early dream come true. And I didn't expect that. You know, I really thought that we would be having to get a grant and like it would take a long time. And that a grant would come first, right? Like that we'd have to prove ourselves with some other funding before a county agency is like, you know, this sounds really good. Like we should do this.
That's very, very interesting. You just described yourself as an information service organization rather than an organizing organization.
We're both. We're definitely both. We're like, yes, information broker organizer.
All right. Tino Fragale, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics.
Thank you.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. My next guest is Anika Manzoor, Executive Director of Youth Activism Project. Anika Manzoor, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil. I hate being here.
Well, thank you for coming on the show anyway. You run a organization called Youth Activism Project. Can you describe what it is?
Sure. The Youth Activism Project is a nonprofit dedicated to eliminating the barrier to teen civic engagement. We were founded in 2004 when I was 12. And I really have to emphasize, I accidentally co-founded this organization. Prior to the Youth Activism Project, I didn't know anything about civic engagement. As you know, a first-generation brown immigrant, society made it very clear to me that my voice didn't matter. And so when I met Wendy Lesko, who lived in Kensington at the time, and she's a big figure in the youth advocacy movement back in the 90s, she kind of got me and my friends together. And the first issue we focused on was the girls' education crisis in the global South. And so my family's from Bangladesh. I was born in Bangladesh. That piqued my interest, but I didn't think I could do anything about it until Wendy ended this awareness raising session with a call to action and asked us if we wanted to be quote unquote architects to help her, do something about this issue. And so I remember thinking as a 12-year-old, that was a really cool way of being addressed. I've never been addressed that way, as if I had some sort of power. And fast forward to senior year of high school, I already had this amazing experience going to Capitol Hill every year, lobbying for legislation related to girls' education in the global South, was actually part of a groundswell of young people that raised the foreign aid budget for education by $200 million. And that was all before I could vote. And so by the time I was an adult, I really grappled with I really contended with how incredible these experiences were that I had as a minor. And honestly speaking, advocacy, just getting your feet wet in advocacy, that's not difficult. As long as you have the resources and the support, which what the Youth Activism Project is trying to do is make those resources and support super accessible and available to all teens that seek it, right? So as long as you have that, you can create really impactful advocacy and organizing campaigns. So that's kind of our story and our ethos.
So where do your resources come from now? I think, 2004 is a long time ago now.
resources in terms of like training and things like that.
Like recruits, resources, money, where do you get it?
So starting with the financial piece, we are very much still a sort of, we were founded as a volunteer nonprofit in 2004, and in 2018, and I've been kind of loosely involved with the nonprofit, for between then and 2018, was on the board for 10 years, mentored a lot of people once I aged out of the primary demographic. And so by the time, so in 2018, that's when I really wanted to focus on scaling our approach and really making sure that young people across the country have access to these kinds of resources, and really building on the seed that we planted back in 2004 and kind of grew into something amazing. So by the time we were transitioning into a staff nonprofit, we already helped young people have 36 policy wins, from anything from local policy all the way to passing the UN declaration for the Day of the Girl, which was, I was part of that victorious campaign. And so we did all that as a volunteer nonprofit. So I was like, if we were staffed and had a little bit more resources, we could help young people create a lot of impact. So we're still very much, I've been working on this full time, sometimes part time, because it's hard with the startup nonprofit, right? To kind of get more resources. Right now, we're funded primarily, each year it looks different. This year we have a lot more paid clients. Last year we had a lot more grants. And then we're also building our individual donor base.
Where all are you working? You said you're nationwide now.
Yeah, so the way that we work is we're basically a membership model. So young people from across the country can just sign up with us. And right now, our members represent over 40 states. We, of course, have a significant contingent in Montgomery County because we are based in Montgomery County and have been doing work there for so long. Some of the most impactful organizing is happening in Montgomery County, and because of our local expertise. And so what we're trying to do is really replicate that and show Montgomery County students as a model for other students, and show them that you guys can do similar amazing activism as well.
Right. So where else are you? I mean, in terms of geographically, where?
Well, it's really like, where are our kids, right? And so they're in, just off the top of my head, Rhode Island, Georgia, California, New York, Texas, Illinois, other parts of Maryland that don't have as strong of a civic engagement culture as Montgomery County, really all over.
So how do they find you?
So we have the privilege of, when you search youth activism or teen activism in Google, because we've existed for so long and we were the cool kids before youth activism became super popular. We're the first thing that pops up in Google for a lot of people when they search for resources. So most of the kids find us through organic search traffic, which I think is pretty incredible.
Really? So basically you were found through Google?
Yep, there's a clear demand for what we want to offer. And these kids are like, I need to find these resources. And they find us.
That's amazing. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the impactful organizing in Montgomery County that you talk about. Give me some examples.
Okay, so Students Toward Equitable Public Schools, you might be familiar with them. We actually incubated that group back in early 2020. Right before the pandemic hit, and they really started, the group was started to build momentum like right when we went into quarantine. And that kind of came about when, for the longest time, the Youth Activism Project wanted to support students around the boundary analysis issue. And so some of the activists that we worked with, prior to graduating from high school, kept us in the loop about how that was going. And so, but there was a moment where we didn't have a strong Montgomery County contingent. So it was really like incumbent upon me to kind of find those students, right? And so in December of 2019, when the crazy stuff happened, and Jill Orman Faust put this scathing public Facebook post. I didn't know who she was, but I was like, sign me up. And that's how I met you and so many other people. And I bet a lot of MoCo folks were like, where did she come from? And so, and I basically kind of through that, started to build relationships with students that were also very much in an action, let's do something about this mode. And I found Avery Smedley, who was then a junior in high school at Einstein, and she had no organizing experience, but she recently did a summer internship that really opened her eyes and like kind of let her connect the dots of like all the inequities that she's seen as a young Black person, and just seeing how pervasive anti-Blackness is, and how we approach housing and education, how all that stuff is linked. And so I found Avery, or we found each other rather, and she kind of became the spark plug for this movement, Students Towards Equitable Public Schools. And so I would mentor her, coach her on a weekly basis. And she set up this amazing infrastructure for this student-led organization that's predominantly led by Black and Latinx students from our most under-resourced schools in Montgomery County, which is so rare. I really have to emphasize how rare that is, because Montgomery County has a thriving student organizing culture, but most of it come from the kids that are white and or wealthy. And so they kind of really, I think, are revolutionizing how we're approaching student organizing in Montgomery County. They already have 4 organizing victories under their belt, which is incredible because they're only 18 months old. And so those victories include being approached by the student board for recommendations for distance learning, which were implemented. And most recently, a couple of weeks ago, leading the coalition that got police officers out of school, right? Which is an incredible victory. And then on top of that, they assisted with immense state victories, overrunning the governor's veto in Kerwin, and also repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, making Maryland the first state to do so. And I will emphasize again, none of these kids had organizing experience prior to co-founding Steps and leading Steps. And they've already assisted and created these wins that takes a lot of, frankly, adult-led organizations years to do. And so that's really like our Steps is so emblematic of our philosophy, right? You don't need to be someone with a lot of civic engagement experience to really launch powerful community transformations through policy advocacy.
You know, this distinction you make between white and wealthy students and Black and brown students reflects the distinction in society. And I used to organize a big mental health conference for students. And I remember inviting SMOP candidates. And after the event, a young woman came up to me who said, I have mental health problems, which is why I came here. But you highlighted SMOP candidates. They don't represent me. I was really, really struck by that. And, I tried thereafter to sort of reach out to those that are not traditionally part of the sort of student activism network. But I don't think I succeeded. Seems like you have. What is the magic?
Finding one student from a school that is, I'm just going to frankly say it, shafted by our county's policies. And that student brings on their friends. Those friends bring on their friends. I mean, very typical organizing.
How are your numbers? I mean, what numbers of students are involved? How that does change over time?
So we have about 300 members right now who are like registered in our hub. And not all of them are super active. I would say probably like a third are active, so about 100. And we're really trying to work on increasing those numbers of who's active. We're also trying to work on having young folks who are either starting or leading youth-led groups. How can they bring their leaders into the fold, get them access to our programming and things like that? so that, we could be a source of activism development for anyone, right? Not just the ones who seek us out and bring back what they're learning from us to their community, right? So we see a lot of that.
Do you have any access to schools themselves? Like, are you allowed to organize inside of schools, or is primarily your work really outside of the school system?
So our model is very much student-centered, right? There are a lot of civic engagement initiatives. A lot of them, it's a common model to go through schools. And we have some teacher partners, but we haven't really invested in school partnerships, A, because of lack of capacity, and B, because our primary focus is reaching the young people. Like we have so much demand, so much more demand than we can actually adequately nurture from the students themselves. So we're kind of focused on that at the moment, but we would like to develop more partnerships with teachers, students, school districts, etc.
In Montgomery County, there are several youth projects, Young Peoples for Progress, Youth Creating Change. How do you work with those organizations? Do you compete? Do you collaborate for, for resources, for recruits? How does that work out?
Well, first off, we have very different focuses, right? So even though we're Montgomery County based and have a strong Montgomery County membership in our program, we are a national organization with a national reach. So that makes it easy for me to see, YCC, YPP, they got to handle a lot of the MoCo stuff. YAP can come in and we can fill in gaps as needed. And so I've collaborated strongly with both of the leaders at these organizations. We definitely don't see each other as a competition. We see each other very much as folks who need to work together in order to really strengthen civic engagement in Montgomery County. So I just love that they're two highly local organizations that are they do have different approaches too, so they complement one another.
What is the difference between their approach?
So YPP is focused on organizing all young people. So their definition of young people is quite large. YCC is very much very much focused, I believe, on high school students. And they don't only do organizing and advocacy. They do any sort of social change, direct service type work, right? And YPP is really focused on organizing.
Well, good luck, Anika, Manzoor, as you grow your program. Before you go, you are the first Bengali-speaking person I've interviewed. So I want to give a shout out in Bengali before we go.
আচ্ছা
আপনি বাংলা বলেন?
জি।
আপনি বাংলায় লিখতে পারেন, পড়তে পারেন?
আমি আমার নাম লিখতে পারি, আমি বাবা মা লিখতে পারি।
আশা করি আপনি বাংলা লিখবেন, পড়বেন, ভালো থাকবেন।
থ্যাংক ইউ, ধন্যবাদ।
Tell me what you're thinking. Why do you always have to leave me here hanging off a cliff? I'm just so tired of trying to make sense of.
What lessons can we draw from my conversations with Anika Manzoor and Tino Fragale? First, what Tino Fragale and Anika Manzoor have built incredibly is an exciting forum for young volunteers to come together for social causes. Tino's organization is in person. Anika's is primarily online, but also in person. Their substantial objectives are incredibly important, but also highly flexible. As Tino says, Everyday Canvassing is both a door-knocking organization and increasingly an information broker. Youth Activism Project is even more open-ended. Its objectives are very deliberately defined by its young members rather than Anika herself. I take from this an old lesson that the journey, or in our two cases, the organizing of volunteers, is as important as the destination. We know the importance of organizations from the study of political science, government, and society, but also sociology and psychology. Organizations are really as much about the people that make them up as they are about their mission and objectives. Have you ever noticed how an organization once created does not tend to go away on its own. There's a term for that, going concern. What Tino and Anika have truly done is to create going concerns where young people can gather joyously. Second, the resourcing model of grassroots organizing is just as important as the mission of the organization. For-profit, non-profit, formal, informal, small, big, everybody has to deal with the resourcing question. Everyday Canvassing and Youth Activism Project have cracked, even if it's a little bit, the resourcing code. They struggle financially, as you heard in the interviews, but they are nevertheless able to bring young people together voluntarily to help their mission. Cracking the volunteer recruitment code is a big, huge deal. Volunteers come for many reasons: a great mission, a search, discovery, but also friendship and camaraderie. The picnics and the get-togethers, often seemingly outside an organization's mission, are meant to fulfill that purpose. If you want to find out more about Everyday Canvassing, go to everydaycanvassing.org. To find Youth Activism Project, go to youthactivismproject.org. That's all for this episode. You've been listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Sic Em Buster, a Washington area rock and metal band. The excerpts used in this episode are from their song I've Got Athlete's Foot and I'm Wearing Your Socks. You can find them on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone who might, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.